So this session is very important to me because I think it's the conversation that's in the background of a lot of the sessions we've had today, but never gets to be front and center in talking about the work we do. So this time together is to get a few perspectives on the human part of our work from the point of view of these panelists. So I'm going to ask them to each briefly introduce themselves and tell us what they thought their career might look like or what they wanted to be when they grew up. For me, I was going to be an astronomer. I got a little sidetracked.
Thanks.
Rachel.
Hello, everyone. I am Rachel Nicholson. I'm head of institution at Backstage Academy, which is a higher education provider up near Wakefield, north of England. And when I was younger, what I wanted to be when I grew up was I wanted to be the first female cinematographer of a James Bond film. And that is still my lifetime ambition.
You've got time. You got time. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Pembe Tokluhan. I'm the founder of P-Top Productions. P-Top Productions is a production company for women, trans and non-binary people working behind the scenes, screens and lens. And when I was younger, I thought that I wanted to be a heart surgeon, and I am far from that now. But I'm very grateful to all the heart surgeons out there.
Hello, I'm David Sheldon-Hicks, co-founder of Territory Studio. We design, animate, do visual effects across lots of different things. I think when I wanted to grow up, I don't know if I have, I wanted to be a Disney animator, so I'm almost there.
And I'm Zack Alexander. I'm a president of Lux Machina Consulting, and we're a virtual production company that deals in a lot of different type of work across many different markets. When I was little, I wanted to be an oceanographer.
Sorry.
And then I got distracted by blinky lights and things. That's why I'm here.
All right, so I posed 4 questions to the panel, and we're going to chew right through them. When talking to clients, how do you differentiate the labor of our work from the machines we depend on to do that work? I see this question as, where the black boxes stop and we begin, and when we need to educate our clients about that difference. So, David, I'd like to start with you on this question.
Yeah, so I guess we never talk about the machines first, is the first thing. It's normally discussing how creative and tech come together, but it's always about expertise in an area. So it's the expertise about the technology and how that's going to be used and how that's going to enable storytelling or an experience, or you need to put people's minds at rest that the technology won't become a problem, but the only way that you do that is through really conveying, the brains that are going to be in charge of all of that. So I think it's always going to come from a people first perspective. So you lead with that, and people like to hear that because they want to be interfacing with people on the other side of the call as well. It is a lot about chemistry and trust. And so if they trust those people to kind of, do the right things and deliver on the project, then that's the most important thing pretty much to anyone. In terms of the types of projects we're on anyway.
Mm-hmm. And when people are on site, Zack, I imagine you run into this a lot, and you're surrounded by that gear. Do you find it becomes more challenging to have that discussion, say with clients, about the expectation of time versus the technology you're surrounded by and what it takes?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, from what David was mentioning, for my experience, I wish I could start at the person talk more often, because the angle that we're usually coming in at is we're a bit more technology and hardware centric, at least in perception. So I'll usually get the first inquiry that's like, oh, I have an LED wall, what do I need to run it? And then it's like, well, what do you mean by run it? And then that kind of involves the sort of conversation back to where you can get to the people and that type of thing. And I think to the immediate question you were saying though is there gets to be a challenge in properly conveying the value of the person and what they're actually doing, because it's a much more kind of fudgy, ethereal thing when you can literally look at it like a render node and say that is literally putting out this many 4K outputs, so it is worth X amount of dollars per output. And then when you try to apply that to a human, it starts to become a discussion of like, well, they have this background, and it's a much more, nuanced conversation, which I've found often productions don't have patience for. So it's trying to like distill that into sound bites that are easier for them to quantify and recognize the value in.
Have you found a formula to have that conversation?
It's proprietary information. No, I mean, I think it's, I think the thing that we always try to convey is that we're not, the gear itself is something, but we're providing a system. And like an analogy I use is a lot of times is I can say, well, you can buy a space shuttle if you have enough money, but like you need astronauts and a whole support staff to actually do something with it. And if your focus is just on the space shuttle, sure, you'll have a big hunk of metal and plastic sitting there, but like it needs to have all this other stuff. And then at some point, it's about just conveying the reliability of like, these aren't just a bunch of yahoos making stuff up. We are like a, finely defined team. And honestly, it's trying to break away from that, like getting them to specifically count people and, well, what are they exactly doing? What are they exactly doing? Because half the time the answer you give them, they won't understand. Because that's why they're hiring you.
I used to say early in my career, if a client walked by and they were like, I'm paying you all this money, why are you sitting around?
Yeah.
I'm like, me sitting around means your show's going well.
Yes. Yeah,
You want
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it's a good segue because I think one of the sidebar issues is when you're providing a system or a labor force or talking about the business of what we do and you're educating students, that pressure to reduce cost, there's reducing costs on gear, there's reducing cost on labor. And I think sometimes the pressure to reduce cost on labor, we do forget that human part of like the hours and expertise and experience that doesn't discount the way the parts do.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on the way that you're pitching yourselves. Really, it's kind of it's all about how you position yourselves to the client and the wider industry. So we always, I mean, it does go back to the expertise thing. I think there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much expertise that you can give to that person. So it is a constrained resource. And there's only so much you can offer that out. And if you're confident about that and you're talking to people that are also probably experts in their field, so they do have an empathy with that position. If we're working with cinematographers and lighting designers and everyone else, they know it's not about the lights or the lenses or the, it is those 30 years up here that get you to that result super quickly. They're paying for the experience, they're not paying for the time. And I think as an industry, we like to break it down into units because we feel more okay with how we then present that value to the client. Mm-hmm. But actually, if you can look at it more around, we are going to confidently deliver this thing they've never done before and no one else has done before, and we're the people that can do that for you, then I think there's an unsaid thing in there that you can tap into that they're really willing to engage with. And I think we just, as an industry, need to be more confident with that and lean into experience as much as anything else.
And for your companies, you tend to represent a team of people, and through education or the mentorship your company does, are you encouraging the people you mentor to recognize like the value we're talking about and being confident that they can represent, when they're negotiating their day rates, if they're working at freelancers, is there a business side of freelancing or entertainment technology work that you try and foster and encourage people to respect in their work as freelancers?
Yeah, I think that it's always a difficult one when you kind of jump into being a freelance to begin with and then working out what your rate is without losing the job or, underselling yourself as well. And I think that taps back into your network, and it's important to utilize the people you have within your network to suss out what might be a reasonable fee to charge somebody, or, what are the skills to negotiate that you will get that work. And that happens by practice, and that happens by being able to be put in those situations. And sometimes you might have a really good bid that you put forward and you might lose the job, and that's fine. And it's about kind of how do you pick yourself up and still have that drive to want to go for the next thing, and actually believe in the idea that you have, that although somebody may not want to pay for that thing, never losing the value. You know, don't undersell yourself, but always remember to not overpromise and underdeliver. Kind of, you know, underpromise and overdeliver is always a better way of doing it.
Is there a business side in what Backstage Academy teaches?
Of course, yeah. I mean, of course, it's folded into curriculum, but there's a certain level to which, you know, it's experiential. And whilst you can sort of lead somebody through it theoretically, the lived experience of that is entirely different. You know, in that moment where they're in that meeting, and actually, you know, it's the first opportunity, and they want to be able to, you know, nearly at all costs, to be able to seize that opportunity. It takes a level of confidence and a level of experience to then start to challenge that. And so I think to some degree, it's not something that you can do a class on and then automatically people leave that class and can go away and go, yeah, this is how to do it. They develop their own technique, their own strategy, but also they learn a lot through observation. And so back to your point about the importance of mentoring is being able to, you know, in terms of developing, you know, supporting the development of early career practitioners or, you know, new members of your team, giving them the opportunity to be witness to some of that is part of equipping them to later on be able to lead on some of that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to move us into our next question. Digital careers tend to be dominated by one demographic. What will it take to diversify our community? Pembe, I want to start with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we can be here all day. I can talk about diversity quite a lot. I think the first point is realising it. I think sometimes we're so used to being in the environments that we're in that we're trying to kind of survive ourselves, that we're so oblivious in some ways to the fact that most people look the same, especially in this sector. And how do we change that? How do we invite people that don't look like us, that don't sound like us, that may come from underprivileged backgrounds or backgrounds that they may not have had as much opportunities to get people through the door? And that there's a lot of different ways that, you know, you can look into that. And I think that one thing that really stands out for me that people don't really think about is, how are you wording things? How are you actually inviting people into your organisation, into your space, into a job that you have out there? Are you already determining the demographics of those individuals by the wording that you're using, the language, the places you're putting it out? Are you relisting it at the same places? You know, we tend to be quite a nepotistic industry. Oh, it's all right, I know somebody that I'll call on and they will always do the job. And if they don't do it, they know somebody. And it kind of then goes back to that thing of the same circle always being invited in. And that doesn't give the people that might not be surrounded in those communities and environments to actually get a chance to come through the door. I think that there is a massive push on organisations to look into diversity and equality. And one thing I would say is that I think that equity is more important than equality. And there isn't much of a focus on equity. And I know that you've got something that might actually be a better way of explaining equity. You know, I'm just going to look back for a second. But, you know, in the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same support. They're being treated equally. And in the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They're being treated equitably. In the third image, all three can see the game without any support or accommodation because that cause of inequity was addressed. I think there's one thing kind of giving people, saying, oh yes, but we support our employees or we support our friends and our families and whatever in this way by giving them this, but not everybody needs the same pen and paper. Some people need to be told and taught how to hold that pen. And some people need to be taught how to write on that paper and which way to have that paper. You know, so it's about actually equipping people with the right skills and knowledge to be able to say, actually, we've now created a fairer system for those people that may have disadvantages or different challenges that stop them from, you know, maybe growing at a faster pace than their peers or their colleagues. How do you, as an organisation, and as a colleague, as a person, support that? You know, I'll kind of finish on this bit. But there's, I think that it goes back to the thing around the dinosaurs and the dinosaurettes of the industry. That's what I like to call them, the gatekeepers. What are you doing to actually open up the gate and see change? You know, it's okay to see people that are different. It's okay to give others an opportunity. Do it. Yeah. I said I can talk about diversity forever, but I'm sure there's some people on the panel that would.
Yeah, how's your experience of this? I mean, when you have full-time team members.
Well, as a white male, let me tell you how diverse it is.
Moving on then.
You said it very eloquently. I think it's an active push towards making it happen, and based on my background and who I am, I know I am not the best equipped to see outside of that, right? And to acknowledge that, and then to have people on your team that can help you see outside that. And like that picture was great. It's funny because the first one where they're all even, that's like the milquetoast version of it. The second one gets perceived as very expensive because you're then trying to like service every individual need. Yeah. And the third one is actually the most efficient because you just remove the problem in the first place. But the third one takes the most thought, right? But and from now I will just shut up and let others talk.
That's what I've always said to you, Zach.
Yes, rightly so.
I've always just questioned if we're doing our best to more generally make our industry appealing to everyone. I don't know how good a job we actually do. You know, if I think about where my kids kind of pull their references from at the moment and all that kind of stuff, they definitely see within a bubble, and you can hear it with the teachers and stuff. You know, you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, or a teacher. That's like, God, really? You know, that's frustrating for me. That's really frustrating for me. So I like at a base level, and going back to your analogy, I just think we just need to be speaking to all young people and making that an attractive decision. And it's getting better. When I do lectures at universities, it's like, oh, this is starting to look good. Mm-hmm. Like they're winning this a little bit more than the rest of us. And I keep having conversations with lecturers and things like, why is that not then feeding through? And I think there's a part on industry to kind of join up with education and go, how do we start to, we're getting something wrong here. There's definitely a disconnect between higher education getting this stuff right and then industry pulling from that point. So I don't know how far away we are from actually having some like big move improvements on this stuff. I might just be being an optimist, but I don't know if it's as much hard work as industry sometimes leads themselves to believe.
I think you actually raised an interesting point because there's this, there's a danger where because the nature of this work is to provide entertainment, which is fun and ideally a stress-reducing experience to consume, that there is this weirdly prevailing assumption that just the fact that you're on a set, that must mean it's a dazzling and miraculous experience, right? And it can have its days where it's like that, but like it is a job. It is, it is show business sort of at a certain level sort of thing. And like having, I think if you like talk about like the doctors and lawyers thing, right? There is the rightly perceived perception is a very serious thing. We're doing very serious work. And this is serious work too. It's in the service of something that may not on its face seem like, if your end product is like a comedy thing, it's kind of hard to sometimes parse out like, oh, the whole day must have been laughs to make that. You're like, no, we spent like hours painstakingly. It was not funny on the day, sort of thing. But like, I think trying to adjust that and like put a certain gravitas behind the work and not let people, like there's this weird sort of perception I've seen companies try to do that I've definitely experienced, where it's, you should be so lucky to be here, sort of thing. And we should all be grateful for what we do, but you can't use that gratitude as a way to then abuse the employees.
Yeah. I think it also goes back to that thing of you can't be what you can't see. If you don't, and that's what a lot of young people take up on, you know, if they don't see people that look like them, that come from similar walks to them that they can relate to, they then kind of zone out. So now what you're seeing a lot more is a lot of young people want to be their own bosses. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be creatives. They actually do, because they're seeing people on TikTok and they're seeing people on the social media channels that they use, which is a massive thing with young people. But how often do you see a black woman, a black disabled queer woman, go and say, I work in tech, come and work in tech? You don't. And it's not about, and it's also that thing of recognizing that you're not also using your employees that are people of color, that are queer, that are whatever, also as tokens, because that then becomes an issue. It's not about saying, well, look, we do have people that look like this. It's actually about just organically allowing it to grow by giving a chance. And whether that's, you know, and that goes back to the next question of the kind of how do we go to training, but it's like shadowees. Are you bringing in people to come in? Are you doing work placements? Are you allowing young people to see that these are possible careers for them to get into, and inspiring them that this is a really fun industry. This is something they will love and enjoy.
Yeah,
you know.
It's not just about the emerging professionals, young people coming into the industry that we need to address. There was a really interesting question after Julie's talk, which was about parents and about other stakeholders. And don't underestimate the power and the influence of parents of going, the creative industries, that's not a stable career, particularly post-pandemic. Maybe go and be a lawyer, go and do something, you know, go and do something slightly more conventional. I think there is a job that we need to do to articulate the professionalism of the industry and the professional opportunities, that it is a real career and it's not running away to the circus. I spend a lot of my time on open days talking to parents, trying to avail them just of that and to give them examples. And that's, you know, harks back to your point. If you can't see it, if there aren't examples, you don't know the community that perhaps you might be recommending your child to go into. And that provides a level of a lack of confidence about that there is going to be the opportunity that we say that there's going to be if you choose to join that community.
Definitely.
But ironically, I mean, that really loops back to the first question, is around how do we make this business commercially viable and a good career choice to go into? If we can hold the ground and make sure that everyone feels valued and, you know, it is a decent career choice, then there isn't that kind of community pushback on, you know, entering into a creative and tech field in that way.
I think the next question might evolve that conversation a little bit, because having this as a career choice, the technology we rely on is evolving at an accelerated pace. How do we keep our own workforce updated, train new team members, as well as the next generation of team members? Rachel, I'll let you start with this one.
So obviously, sort of coming from a more structured educational background, I can talk to that, but one of the things that I think is really interesting from some of the talks over the past 2 days that I've heard is just where people have talked about projects that they've worked on where they've learned on the fly. We even had a conversation about it last night, didn't we, about how, you know, you will start with a new piece of technology on that product and you will learn on the fly. One of the things that I think, you know, of course, technology training and structured training exists. Could there be more opportunity? Absolutely, there could be more opportunity. Could there be more accessibility? Absolutely, there could be more accessibility to that. But that's one part of the picture. The other part of the picture goes back to the original title of this discussion, which is about the human side of it. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about the functional learning of the equipment. It's about learning as a human how to integrate with that piece of equipment and then how to use it. And really, back to your point, David, you learn that through experience. So actually, some of the most valuable learning experiences that I've had personally have either been through myself doing it and learning on the fly and making my own mistakes, or hearing about the learning and the mistakes of others. And so is there an opportunity in terms of, training up new team members, the next generation of team members, to be a bit more open about actually what are our greatest failures and how did we overcome them? Those are the talks at conferences that really, get me latched into them, because actually I learned so much from that, and I learned so much about the way that somebody approached a challenge, the way they overcome it, how they've reflected on it. It starts a conversation. I also learn more about the technology that way, because I learn about the application of the technology far more than if I just did a technical training course on a particular product. So how can we as a community create an environment where actually there's much more, there is less of a negative perception of failure, and that is actually part of the community learning that we're all doing, and we can create an environment where we all feel more comfortable sharing some of those learning experiences with each other, so that the whole community can both evolve and develop and grow.
I think that speaks to your point about finding shadowing positions, because it's not so much, I think what you're saying about learning a specific piece of technology, but learning about the capacity for learning.
And learning to be a professional.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the human side of it, learning actually how to interact with other people, other departments, work with what everybody else brings to the team and be able to adapt.
Yeah.
And I think the people skills, you're only going to get the people skills by actually going out there and working. Most of the time, the reason why you get called again is because you've been kind or you've been nice. The person that's not been the nicest person to work with is not the person you're going to think of when you think, okay, I've got this new job now. And actually, it goes back to that thing of shadowing. I think there's that thing where you go into education, and a lot of young people struggle with this. They go through education for years, go to higher education, and then they're told, you can't get this job because you don't have an experience. It's like, how do you get that experience? The only way they're going to get it is by coming and shadowing someone, is by getting a mentor, is by allowing somebody to just come and see what you do for the day and ask questions and just have that communication and build that communication skills up for them.
Yeah.
And it's probably responsibility of companies too, right? I mean, it's great that the individuals take on some, but I just feel like properly apportioning budget to training, setting time aside for people to do that. We haven't got it all figured out, by the way. We're still doing this.
Damn it! I thought you did.
No, and then R&D as well. Like there are R&D, incentives there. Like use them. They're amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's also I think some of the thing that I know that I've tried to take a more of a focus on is also educating the clients, because if you have your multi-million, $100 million show and you show up and go, it's cool, I got like these 5 people shadowing me, it's gonna be great. Like, as a client, I'd be like, well, I'm paying you X amount of money to make this thing happen. But without that experience for those shadows, like that, you don't learn it that way. So it's being able to navigate both the relationship with the employer to say like, no, don't worry, like we're not gonna like put Timmy, this is his first hour on this thing, in your thing, but like we need this person to be here so that, a year or 6 months or a week from now, this is an acceptable thing, and they're aware of what the standard is, right? Because if you restrict your shadows to, it's this, I don't know, one single monitor playback thing, it doesn't actually give them context for something much bigger.
But it's just kind of getting them through the door as the first part.
For sure.
So just being able to be inspired by being in that space is a beginning of something.
Yep.
It's like when you're a kid and you see something and you're like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to do this. It's because you've seen something that's inspired you to do that. And I think that it goes back to the responsibility of organizations and what your organization stands for. If you really want to leave a legacy, how are you actually training people up to understand your values, understand your missions and your morals and what you do and why you do it? So when a client books you, they know actually what's really amazing about your organization is that you don't just say you're focusing on diversity and equality and bringing up people, you're actually doing it. And I think there's a lot of this thing of, making space is the most important thing. And if you can't create that space, then you just end up with the same people again and again in that same cycle. It's like, I'm sure you've had somebody who gave you a chance at one point, we all have, that's then allowed us to be here or be who we are or get the works that we do. And yeah, it kind of starts with just that inspiring moment, I guess.
Well, Zack said, sorry, I was just going to say Zack said my favorite two words, which are client education, but I think your point is it's really client partnership that we need them to want to help us reshape what we
if
look
you've
like.
got something you've created and you want to train people up, you want that team to then be inspired. You want them to then want to train others up, and you want to have a big pool of people, and then that means more work for you, more capacity to be able to cater to the client, to give them good quality employees that are going to deliver the work. But you've had to take some time, or you've had to put some things into place to actually create that system that then creates that longevity.
Rachel, you were going to say.
I was just going to say, I also think that, it was interesting with lots of companies that in the pandemic, some of the first things, departments that were cut were the training parts of their organisations. And I think that we need to shift the perception of training as, we're talking about it as being an early career thing, but actually it's an ongoing career thing, that actually that's an investment, not a cost, and that will benefit you, and trusting in that it will benefit you and benefit your business, rather than it actually looking at it from a short-term point of view, because I think that's the biggest risk, is that, if we're not creating that space for that to happen, then nothing will progress.
Yeah, we were saying that earlier before the talk around how do you create spaces that are safe and comfortable for employees to actually say, without fear, I don't know how to do this, can I get a bit more training? Without the fear of, oh, okay, well, they can't do the work, let's get someone else. Or, it's about creating that space where people can ask and can come together, and learn and share ideas and share knowledge. Knowledge is power.
Yeah. And it relates back to the first question about that relationship between, technology and humans and how things are costed. We need to be careful that we're not guilty of that ourselves, and that actually we value the human side of it as much as we want other people to, and that hopefully will be easier for them to see if we reflect that in the way that we organise ourselves.
You made a really good point, too, about being able to say, I don't know, because I can remember the show, what I was wearing, and who I was talking to the first time I felt confident enough to tell a client or someone I was working for. I didn't know how to do a thing, but I knew how to figure it out if I had the time to do that. I'm going to take us to our last question. Creative video production can suffer from incredibly stressful work environments, time, and budget pressures. How do we encourage wellness for our community and client support? And I think now partnership is going to be my term for that, of that wellness. Zack, I'll start with you.
I think it's in a weird way you have to establish your own internal lanes and borders, and you have to be really mindful of that. Is that I think there's a I think what I'd mentioned before about the you're so lucky to even be working on something as magical as this. I think we sometimes internalize that as well, because oh my gosh, someone is paying me to do this thing that my parents told me I would never make money doing, or whatever, you know what I mean? So you'll kind of over invest on it, and there's without having a sort of a self-recognition of kind of what damage that can lead to over a long term, it can be incredibly, hurtful to yourself. And I think if you can establish that with yourself, then that philosophy, it's easier to kind of spread onto all levels of it, right? And it's really just acknowledging that you can't be at 110% all the time, because then that just becomes the new normal, and that creates a spiral that is really hard to kind of pull out of. But yeah, it's I think in terms of what I specifically do is I know that it's little silly things like when we're bidding out labor for show site, being very specific about when overtime starts, right? And then the financial because like people will be like, oh, Zach, it's weird that you're like, when we cross the hour, it's a full hour of like overtime or whatever. It's like, why are you being so like obsessive about that? And it's like, it's not about the money. It's about you do one show and you do someone a favor by staying an extra hour at no cost. And for them, that was cool. That was their one show, you helped them out. But then you do that over and over and over again over the course of a year. And if you track any of that stuff, you realize that you just did an extra, I don't know, weeks of work that was just sort of given to the world with no, and it's not like it's not like a money thing, it's like an effort thing, where you're kind of, if you don't respect the value of your effort, then people won't respect it either.
I'm going to build on what Zach said. I just think I think all of my answers go back to the same thing, which it just starts with people, which is just saying the obvious out loud. And it also just comes down to personal confidence. And if that can kind of happen at the top,
Yep.
So, I do therapy on a weekly basis, and that should be seen as perfectly healthy. We all go to personal trainers, we all go to therapists, and it just starts from a confident place. And I don't know if enough business leaders do that. And I don't know if that is then seeping throughout the culture of companies. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when it looks at budget pressures and time pressures, it's just having that articulation to know how to kind of frame that and work with the client. And it's not a straight pushback. There's nuance and there's grey to it. But everyone else around you understands the reasons that you're doing things. And you're listening all the time. If people feel listened to, they'll work with you, both sides. On your team and with the client. It's empathy. All of it's empathy, and it starts with people, from my point of view.
I think that if I just add just quickly, because I can see the time ticking down as well, just around that thing of encouraging from the top downwards, I think that's really important. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody who's looking at me right now about the importance of creating space for your colleagues, for your employees, encouraging things like therapy sessions, and actually looking at that as, this is an investment rather than a cost, and which is what you said, and that's really important, that actually our well-being is an investment. And having come out of the pandemic and hearing a lot about mental health and spending 2 years working from home in the comfort of your own space in whatever way, in your pajamas all day or whatever it is, how do you not create a pajama office, but how do you create a space where people actually can say, I don't feel okay, I would like this support, or I want to do this. And it goes back to that thing of creating the safe space where we come out of that mentality of we just have to get the work finished. It's like, okay, you have to get the work finished is one thing, but your well-being has to come first to get that work finished.
Well, you have to practice what you preach too.
Yes.
Because especially from the top, because if you say don't worry everybody, log off at 6 or 5 or whatever, and then they can see you slacking or doing emails, it doesn't, I say this fully well knowing that my bosses may be seeing this, but I work really hard to actively ignore things sometimes. Because especially the boss.
It's healthy.
Well, because if I don't do it, then and then I also have to respect when people are ignoring me, right? I have to look at the time zone they're in and say I'm gonna throw this out there because I need it out there, but I'm not gonna expect an answer, and I have to be okay with that, even if people who are asking me for the thing that they need are not. Someone has to be the line and say the work is done right now. It will resume.
But it goes back definitely to the practice what we preach. We do all work our asses off, and I think sometimes we do need to know when to stop and take a break.
And I think the next generations coming into the industry are coming in with a different mindset. They're coming in with a much better ability to articulate their mental health and well-being. The language is there for them to be able to try to communicate that. And they're going to bring their own demands. And that generation is going to change the way that we work. Yeah. And what we need as the progressing generation, we need to be open to allowing them to change us rather than expecting us to change them.
It is so frustrating in the best way. as I get older and hire younger people, the amount of conversations where something like that'll come up, and like my gut will be what I learned, which was like the suck it up, and I'm like, damn it, yeah, you're right. Doesn't make this conversation. It makes it more complicated, but it is ultimately healthier and worth it. So just know that, employees out there, if I do this and pause, it's computing, I swear. But yeah, it's
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to open up the room to questions. I hope this has been interesting. Let's get some mics going.
Hi, I think that this is a really obviously heartfelt talk, but for a lot of us. And I'm curious about within organizations, if you look at building out education, either internally or externally, there's a specialization to doing that. And I'm curious if you have any advice on, because I feel like we need to bring in people that are focused on that within the company, not expecting everybody within your organization to understand how to bring somebody through a training process, right? I think that there are a lot of people, at least at the company that I work for, that are thrilled to have somebody shadow and thrilled to teach, but don't have the ability to oversee that process. And it's not an HR thing, because there's an understanding of how to build how to build these kinds of people. And I'm curious, I feel like the community at large needs to look at this, and I'm wondering, I guess Rachel specifically, if you have any advice on what the right kind of talent set might be to find people to then build these kinds of things within an organization.
It's a really interesting question. Obviously, caveat that with different organisations at different levels, different challenges. One of the things that I think we should all be doing is going, well, if we want something, who's doing it really well? What industries are doing it really well? And what, as a bit of a magpie industry, can we steal from other industries and repurpose to ourselves? And so I'm really interested at the moment, I'm looking at organisations that have coaching through their organisation, and coaching that goes all the way up, at all levels, and it's not just about people coming into the organisation, but it's also about how coaching is being used to enable the personal and professional development of people throughout. And I think that's a really interesting way of then folding in education at all levels into that, but by having that person who isn't necessarily a subject specialist, but who can perhaps come in, have a look at your organisation, have a look at how you're working together and what the opportunities are, as well as what some of the barriers are as well. So it's by no means this will fix it for everybody, but that's one of the areas I'm looking at the moment to go, well, how can we in higher education or educators at large work with industry to maybe be part of that story and be part of that sort of internal analysis of a company, and maybe offer a little bit of the expertise that we've got, but also listen to you guys as well about how the two elements work together.
So to dovetail off that, because I think that's a super important approach to have, like the coaching at all levels. We kind of also, this year, we were able to hire someone who's like the head of our own internal education program. And I don't know if it was like a cynical way of looking at it, but I think there's also a business way of looking at this, where like we hire this woman, we're trying to like increase her team, but we look at it kind of in three ways. There's internal education, right, where you bring in the person, and it's really more of like an operational expense, where it's like we need someone to collect all of the kind of colloquial knowledge from everybody, categorize it, and then distribute it. So that's like a real practical sort of thing. And then there's the type of knowledge that is sort of like the next level out, because we're part of like a bigger organization. So there's sort of another kind of framing of that sort of knowledge. And then there's also this sort of third version of it where you can almost be education as marketing, because if you want to be a thought leader, you need to be able to articulate the thoughts that you are leading with, right? And having someone who is specialized in education, which is literally the practice of sharing thoughts, is like a super appropriate thing. So I think it's being more clever than, and I'm not trying to say that thinking of it as education is limiting, but I think if you're trying to convince people to spend budget on it, if you can tie it into the operational aspect of education, the marketing aspect of education, as well as pure education, I think it gets you a lot further down the road, and it's easier to kind of convince folks above you about the value of that.
Thank you. Hello. Mine's more of a statement followed by a question, and it's for Pembe. First of all, I'm just a massive fan. I think Pembe is probably one of the brightest leaders that we have coming into our industry. And if you want to check out P-Top Productions, you'll see exactly why. So I'm hugely passionate about what you're doing, man. High five. And I'm really excited that Pembe and future leaders in our industry are connected with Framework, because I think together we will really truly diversify this industry. But my question really is around, I think a lot of what we do, we've done it several times in the last hour, is we always talk about higher education, we talk about HE. And to you, Pembe, an inspirational moment when I joined a panel with you was when you talked about your connection to your youth work. Now, I'm scared for the room because I'm about to open up a subject, which means she might not shut up for another hour. But in just a couple of minutes, would you please just share the work you do with the youth work and how you're bringing that work into the live entertainment industry and into P-Talk?
Yeah, so with P-Talk Productions, we created another strand to it, which is P-Talk Academy, which basically provides training, mentoring and shadowing opportunities, predominantly for young people from marginalised communities to come into the industry. The way in which we do that is we mentor people. So I've mentored 56 young people in the last 5 years. I've been a youth worker for 9 years as well. And we have other people that are mentors that take on mentees and kind of support them, whether that's meeting up once a month to just have a chat or bringing them along to a job and giving them a shadowing opportunity. So what we'd hope to be able to do is to show young people that these are possible career paths for them to get into. I won't take a long time, but when I was in college, I was the only woman out of 59 guys on a music production course. 5 to 7% of the audio industry is made up of women, and maybe 1% of that women of colour, if I'm being very generous. 75% of photography students actually are women, but then only 15% of them go on to take it up as career paths. So there is something around why does the industry almost feel like a big gate, a big, really scary gate for young people, and how are we going and knocking on these doors? So I go and I rattle cages and I do knock on people's doors and I go, well, what are you doing? And it's not about kind of going, what are you doing and you're in trouble. It's like, okay, what are you doing? Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? How are you encouraging the local young people, the local community that you're in? We hear the word community a lot. You know, and for me, my community is really important. I grew up in Hackney, but my community, when I say my community, is people of colour, queer people, women, trans and non-binary people, people that are underrepresented, and how am I being an ally to bring those young people through so that they can actually thrive in these spaces, but not just be tokens, you know, feel safe and actually want to encourage others to say, yeah, come, you can actually come and do this. So I do a lot of different things. I run youth projects, I run masterclass sessions for young people on introductory roles like introduction to tour management or sound design or lighting design. And people actually come to those sessions. So when people are out there and they're saying, those people don't exist, they do. You know, they do, and there's more to train, and we've definitely seen an issue around training and finding people that are trained enough over the last couple of years, especially this year with everything going crazy. So yeah, just kind of supporting young people as best as I can. I've probably engaged with indirectly and directly 30,000 young people in the 9 years that I've worked in youth work, and I hope to grow that number and have some of you also in the space and in the world that support young people as well. You was a young person yourself one day, you know, so just think about what that means to get someone to just go, yeah, come on, I'll give you a chance.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak in one more question before we break. Cal, can we get a mic here?
Amazing talk, loved it. Just very quickly, on the subject matter of encouraging wellness, I know that you've been really transparent about being, in therapy as a business leader. I was just curious as to how many people on this stage are mental health first aid trained, and if you are, do you have if you are, do you have mental health first aiders within your organisations? What are you doing to actually make this meaningful?
Mental health trained is what?
Mental health first aid.
Oh, yes. Gotcha.
I don't think they have that where we come from.
No.
I will hook you up.
We do.
I will hook you
Yeah. No, I would say from our the larger NEP organization, we do offer. There's actually a host of services that folks can take advantage of. I will say they're probably not advertised as best as they could be within the organization. That's something we're trying to be better at. But yeah, in terms of, I've gone to a fair amount of therapy in my day, so I think that tangentially, I might have some ability of the first aid, but unfortunately, in the U.S., it's not much of a thing in the same way.
I think in the UK it's a lot more common now. There is a big thing of it. There's a lot of things around pronoun training. There's a lot of things around mental health training and just good practice, good communication skills. I think that it's important to recognise that if you've got those things out there for your employees, what are you doing to not make it compulsory, because it shouldn't feel like you have to do it. It might be triggering for some people. Some people might just not want to do it. But it's about how do you make it very clear that these things are on offer as well.
That's actually a big part of what NEP has been trying to do too. Because we kind of came into the company only about a year ago, and they've actually it's really been really cool to see how much is we need to be better, and admittedly you're trying to pick up off of decades of a world that didn't really care, but it's nice to see the interest and actual functional things to make it happen rather than just oh, that's cool.
I think the pandemic kicked this off in a proper way.
For sure.
And we have got people, and we do have a service. I'm not that impressed with the service. I don't think, or I haven't come across something that just naturally slides in and works in a way that people feel comfortable to approach. I think it's some work, some serious work to be done in this area, and I think it will be a subject that's just going to increase in importance. As we've kind of seen through all of these questions, they're all kind of alluding to this in one way or another. So I think, it's a big one to tackle.
Especially with the hours we keep. One of the saddest things you can ever hear is, well, I didn't have time to go take advantage of the health services because I was doing a show. And you're like, ugh.
And we hear a lot about especially in kind of touring and the music industry and the creative sector, riders. And we hear a lot about tech riders and catering riders. I don't know if people have heard much about access riders and being able to create access riders for people so that they can actually talk about maybe an illness or something that they have that they may require a bit more support with. Or you can call them a care rider, access rider, a care rider. I think that's something that you might hear more often now that I've kind of sparked the word of it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two sides to it. Obviously, within higher education, we have a duty of care to be able to support our students, but obviously our staff as well. So there's a number of us that are mental health first aiders. I'm currently doing a level 2 mental health awareness training, which is a free government-funded training scheme that I'm doing over 11 weeks. And the reason I want to do that is I am not a therapist. I do not have the expertise to be able to offer that to somebody. But as being a mental health first aider, I can be a triage point to help support and direct students, staff, friends to professional support and what is available. And I can also just be an ear to listen. And I think that's really important. But for me, having taken the opportunity, I'll go to the opening of an envelope. So if there's any sort of training going on, I'll absolutely lap it up. But what it gives me personally is more awareness a better range of language, a greater sensitivity, so I can be a better listener. So undoubtedly, I think certainly within the UK, there is a mental health crisis. It is very, very difficult for somebody to get a referral within a timely fashion to be able to get that support. Within our organisation, we're providing routes to be able to make that shorter, and I think that's something that organisations might want to be able to look at, is what can they do to support their staff so that if they are in a point of crisis, that they're not then in a 6 to 12 week wait on the NHS to be able to get support and therapy, and that's one active thing that you can do. But also, what can we do as a team, as a community, to make ourselves better listeners, to better enable a quality of discussion where people can say, you know, I think we all know it's okay not to be okay, and that's a great sort of mantra, but it's hard to live by when you're in a point where you're anxious, you're not, you know, you're in a high pressure situation, you're in front of a client, and you know there is the drive to let's deal with that after we've got this job done. And sometimes we need to have mechanisms to support people to be able to deal with things whilst the job is being done, not to kind of go, we'll put it off until afterwards.
And with that, I want to thank the panel, thank everyone here. Let's have lunch, and we're back just after 2. Thank you, everyone.